52 there, and next up we're going to go to Campus Clash. We've seen the backlash and the controversy surrounding positive discrimination in workplaces, and now it's time to actually look at whether or not we need these diversity policies, I think. Or are these diversity policies just absurd? That's what I reckon. Let's scrap the whole lot of them. To discuss further though, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Ryan Bell-Morley, a trainee teacher who disagrees that diversity politics are absurd, and Jake Scott, PhD student in political theory at Birmingham University, who does agree with me that it's absurd. Jake, why do you agree with me here that these policies are just absurd and frankly patronising?
Well, if we begin with the topic of education, the best work on this produced in the last few years is Heather McDonald's The Diversity Delusion, in which she points out that diversity policies actually damage the prospects of those they're meant to help. So, taking the example of Ivy League schools in America, McDonald shows that affirmative action pursued on the crude basis of physical characteristics fails to take into account the socioeconomic background of the applicants. And what this means is that poor students, who admittedly are predominantly black in America but predominantly white in Britain, enter schools with a higher standard of expectation and rigour than they're used to, because the deprived areas that they're from have such poor schooling that they're not prepared to meet those high standards. As a result, the dropout rate amongst poor students is phenomenally higher in top schools. And if the students actually went to schools that they were probably more suited to, they would perform a lot better. The graduation rate's a lot higher, the achievement rate's a lot higher, which sets them up better for life. This is just as true in Britain. We fail to account for the real determinants of social performance, school performance, such as strong and reliable family networks, and focus on crude categories such as sex and race. So that's broadly where I stand with regards to that.
Ryan, why do you disagree then? All of Jake's remarks there were quite, I think, justifiable, weren't they?
To a degree, I understand where it's coming from with some of the points. However, I would say at its basis, when discussing this statement, diversity policies are absurd. We've got to take into account that at their core, diversity policies are there to eliminate discrimination and to accommodate cultural differences. And I don't believe, therefore, to argue that these policies are absurd is to suggest that discrimination is no longer an issue in our society.
Well, Jake, can I let you come back to that? Are you fundamentally saying that you actually believe that discrimination doesn't exist in modern Britain?
It depends on the style of discrimination that we're talking about. If you want to look at the Sewell report, which came out very recently, which is phenomenal, Tony Sewell basically concluded that systemic racism is not a problem in Britain. I'm not suggesting that racism doesn't exist, but rather that the systemic presence of it is negligible. The real discrimination, broadly speaking, is against white working class boys.
Ryan, briefly, please, if you just can, if you come back to that, very briefly.
So, briefly, I think definitely there's discrimination between white working class men, for sure. I hold my hands up, I'm one of them. I've experienced it myself to a degree. Even my accent, where I'm from, you come down south, it's different. But to argue that's the only or predominant issue that we face today, I think that in itself is absurd.
Well, Brian, I like your accent. So Brian Bell-Morley there, trainee teacher, and Jake Scott, PhD student in political theory at Birmingham University. Thanks very much for your time.